Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick, and we're here with Matt Spitz, who's the Vice President of Engineering at Vanta. Thanks for coming on the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
It's so I always want to start out with your background, and maybe you can kind of correct me if maybe we're being not flattering enough or too flattering, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Matt, in his role, he helps to secure the internet and protect consumer data. Vanta is a compliance and security automation startup founded in 2016 in the wake of several high-profile data breaches. The startup was last publicly valued at $1.6 billion. And before joining Vanta, Matt was the site lead at Dropbox's New York office. He oversaw growth from 0 to 160 employees, including 90 engineers, and was responsible for mission critical products and infrastructure. And chances are there are probably several dozen of engineers that you hired or worked with that are on Blind and listening to the show. So hopefully that doesn't make you too nervous.
Not at all.
So I want to dig into your background. You graduated from Stanford with a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science. Between all those years, you likely took every single class in the catalog. Were there any courses that proved to be particularly pivotal in your career looking back?
I think that I wish I had been more intentional in college. And I think that my approach to this was let me just take things that are interesting to me. And that ended up being a systems master's degree and ended up being a computer science bachelor's degree. And the pivotal ones were the ones that were most memorable, I would say. And the ones that were most memorable were the ones that were the most challenging. And Stanford had this, Stanford Computer Science at the time, I'm sure it's still true, had this real emphasis on group work for projects. And so it wasn't the same group every single time, but there was probably like 6 to 10 people at any given point that I was working on group projects with. And some of these, particularly the graduate level networking class, the graduate level artificial intelligence class, et cetera, were just very, very difficult experiences, not just for me, but for the group of people that I was working with doing those classes. And I think that going through those are things that we still reminisce about. I mean, I'd like to think that we have more interesting things to talk about now, but 15 plus years later, we're still talking about the really, really, really hard classes that we took together in college.
I mean, what made it so challenging? Was it the course material? Was it the collaboration? Probably a mix of the two, perhaps.
The collaboration was fine. I mean, I generally got to pick the people I worked with, and you pick people that I worked with pretty well. A lot of this stuff is really hard. I mean, I think it's interesting in college, you're going to some degree of frontier in each of these like different classes and different specialties. And it's not to say that I went to the frontier of artificial intelligence in the 2000s, or I went to the frontier of like networking systems or whatever, but you got a taste of every piece of that. And if you're doing several of those per quarter, it's a lot to balance and a lot to manage. And um, I think that the nice thing about college is it's an opportunity to explore those domains and explore those different types of um, different types of specialties without actually having to commit to it. It's sort of a way to sample off the menu to see if something like artificial intelligence or something like systems or something like operating systems or networking, whatever, is something that's particularly interesting to me or not.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of that exploration phase because I feel like a lot of technologists they get into their head like, you know, if you're younger, I'm going to go to college. I want to work in tech. I want to become a software engineer. And you've kind of self-select very quickly, right? You try to find your specialty. Um, Perhaps you explore in college. And when you complete college and you get off into the working world, suddenly that exploration starts to go away, right? You see a lot of people on Blind, they feel really pressure to specialize in, I want to know everything about the blockchain because I want to work at a Web3 or a cryptocurrency company. And they start, trying to funneling themselves down that path.
Mhm.
Can you talk about whether it's important to specialize within tech or as an engineer?
Yeah, I can't disagree with the notion that exploration ends in college more. I think the industry, the field, the technology landscape, it's all changing so quickly that the the tech industry that you join out of college today will be very different from the tech industry in 5 years, very different from the tech industry in 10 years, et cetera. And continuing to keep one's mind open, continuing to understand like what is out there, continuing to play with technology and get to the bottom of the sea on some new technology that you maybe didn't exist, or maybe there wasn't a course for you in college on that, is just a really important way to be a well-rounded and opinionated engineer. Um, I think obviously that comes with, not everybody has that luxury or has that ability to explore different types of working environments or different types of technology stack. But for those that have that opportunity, and for those that can, that's the way to sort of accelerate one's career beyond what your first job is, beyond what your second job is, and really laying the foundation for a long-term career of learning and a long-term earning potential to to um, to take advantage of everything, the collective set of everything that one has learned over one's career.
I think what's really interesting is, like accountants and lawyers, they have these like continuing education certifications, right? Like they have to go to a certain amount of webinars or conferences to be able to know what is going on within their industry. There's no equivalent, I mean, to my knowledge of engineering, right? So, what do you recommend for an engineer that wants to get that continuing education in their career? Maybe
Yeah.
they're a few years, even a decade plus out of school.
Yeah, I think I think that by the time that one puts together a certification course for something in tech,
Right.
uh, it's probably out of date.
Right.
I think that, you know, I don't have any secret weapons here in terms of the sources of information, but your favorite, you know, your favorite information source of whether that's Hacker News or reading Twitter or that's sort of one way to collect this sort of information. I think another piece of this, which is sort of related to exploration, is just to surround yourself with the smartest people that you possibly can and the most interesting people that you possibly can in tech. And those are the people that'll draw you toward playing on the frontier of technology, or they're the ones that are going to tell you about new and upcoming things that everyone's going to be talking about in 1 to 2 years. And the more you're able to find those people and keep in touch with them, the more you're able to like expose yourself to new and interesting and different ideas. So for better or for worse, there's not a like formal certification process to stay up to date with what's happening. Um, but by building one's network and kind of finding out what other people are paying attention to, I think is a great way to kind of stay on top of it.
I like that a lot. That's a kind of great career advice piece. So it sounds like what you're saying is this: you want to surround yourself, put aside any certifications, accreditations, coursework, find really smart people, people who are, really thinking outside the box, people who are making a difference, and align yourself with them, because you know, then you become part of that. So you're going to learn by being around them, and you're going to kind of get your game to that next level. Now,
Mhm.
do you have to does someone like have to move to Silicon Valley, let's say, or San Francisco if they want to be in tech? Or do you think now with Zoom and everything going digital that you could kind of meet these people online, or is that just harder to do?
That's a good question, and honestly, I don't think we know yet. I think 5 years ago, the place where people would congregate would be in in-person meetups or working together in an office. I think that with the pandemic, I think the pendulum has swung very much the other way and sort of issuing in-office culture and in-office anything in favor of Zoom. I mean, we're recording this over Zoom. We could be doing
Right.
it in person if maybe someone would have to travel for it. Um, I think I would say it depends. I mean, like the nice thing about engineering and tech is that we are sort of at the forefront of asynchronous or remote communication. I think it's like been more comfortable in tech to do this transition to more working from home than it has been in other industries, certainly. But I also feel like there's no substitute for being in person with somebody and committing to spend the time collaborating with somebody in person, getting to know that person in person, really deeply communicating with them at another level when you talk about like body language and things like that. Um, I'm not dogmatic in saying that that's the only way to work, but I think that there have been as the pendulum has shifted towards more remote work, I think that we've thrown away something that's actually quite valuable in in-person collaboration or the opportunity to collaborate in person.
I agree, because this would make me unpopular, but I advocate for people, particularly young people who are starting out their careers,
Hmm.
to go into the office just for the reasons you mentioned. Because it's if you're at home and they're giving you tasks to do and you're doing it in isolation, it's really hard to get a vibe check of like what's going on in the company, what are they doing, to be in the meetings, to just be in the hallway, have those serendipitous conversations where you're going to learn something or you're going to meet somebody new. And I think the people who want to stay home, and I respect their decision because everybody has their life, everyone has their issues. You may have young children, you may be a single parent, you may have elderly, parents who are sick. So, I understand that. But if possible, if you could go in, I think it escalates your chance of meeting people, have those interesting conversations, finding a mentor, maybe as you get older, have a protege. I mean, it's a world of a difference.
Hmm.
And I
I
think
think
it's
that
changed the trajectory of people's careers, right?
I totally agree with that. I mean, I personally learned so much just sitting next to someone who is experienced and looking over their shoulder and seeing them using their editor and saying, like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
How did you do that? And you would never see that if you were communicating with them over Zoom. You overhear stuff when you hear like somebody says like, "Oh, hey, can you give me a code review on this whatever?" I didn't even know that whatever was happening. Like, let me go learn about that. Let me go ask questions. There's just like so much more. I believe that it's important that a workplace environment needs to structure itself such that someone does not have to be in person to be successful. But, for example, like you shouldn't have to be in person to like be able to work on projects that are interesting. You shouldn't have to be in person to find out what's relevant for your day-to-day work. But we shouldn't throw away the upside that comes with that just because we can work remotely. I would argue one other thing too is like I think your point is right, Jack, that we it is it is it can be better for someone, especially earlier in their career, to be surrounded by other engineers to work in person. But then there's the other next step of that, which is that they I would only do that at at a company that actually does good in person culture. I think a lot of companies today, because they may have an office, but they're maybe not used to using it anymore. It's really just a hotel. It's a library essentially, which isn't, you don't get
That
the
is the
benefit.
worst of both worlds, because then you schlep into the office, no one's around, and you just feel like this is terrible. I just commuted in, I'm looking around, no one's here. This is so depressing. I might as well be back home.
I may be one of the rare people that
Yeah.
actually enjoys commuting and having a little bit of separation between work and life, but I understand that I'm in the minority on that one.
Well, it depends how long. Like if I come in, I'm in a suburb now in New Jersey. And if I go to Manhattan, where when I first got the house, the real estate people told me, oh, don't worry, half an hour. And you'd be shocked that the real estate person did give you the whole truth. So it's like an hour and change each way because there's always something wrong. I mean, in theory, you could get there really quickly, but there's always a car accident. A train is always have a problem. So, oh my gosh, it wears you down. But if you have a 10, 15-minute commute, that's perfect. Now, let me
Exactly.
ask you this, Matt. In addition to kind of being, because this is some really good advice you're giving. So, in addition to, if you can be around people to get mentored and learn, do you think you have to absolutely specialize and be an expert in one area? Or, because I think your career is a little different, where you can have an expertise in a whole bunch of different areas, put them together, and then help succeed that way?
Yeah, I think there's a sort of sometimes I talk to people coming right out of school and I ask them, what do you want to do? And they say something like, 5 years ago was I want to get into computer vision because that's the future. And it's like, okay, but like, do you like computer vision? Are you really interested in this at all? It's like, no, 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 but it's the future, so I need to go do it. And I think that a lot of, and that's obviously a caricature. I think that there are people who are really deeply interested in distributed systems or really deeply interested in mobile technologies or whatever. And like that is a passion and people want to go pursue that, whether that is deeply specializing at a company or going and getting a PhD or something like that, like more power to them. Um, I happen not to be one of those people, and I think that there are interesting problems everywhere, and I think more importantly, there are more interesting problems out there than one would know coming out of school. Like I didn't even know I didn't know half the things I worked on in the first 5 years out of school existed coming out of school, and without an open mind and you know, without an open mind to what those problems might be, I don't think I ever would have discovered them. And so I think that when it comes to specialization, I think it is important to have an opinion and have a strong opinion about something, and whether that is really going deep on the first language that you learn and really deeply master, such that you have an opinion when you're presented with other languages. You can say like, this thing is better than that first language I use, or the this thing is not as good as this other thing I like. Like the deeper you go, the more you can have an opinion about something, and the more that opinion is transferable to other sorts of technologies that you're using. So, for example, I went deep on Python when I first started, and I knew a lot about Python. And um, when I learned Java, I learned there was a lot of stuff that was not good about Python because it was, the stuff that was good in Java was not good in Python. Um, and vice versa. And I just like, because I had a depth in something, I could apply that as I went forward in other capacities. And I think that like it's important in the same way that like in college when you're learning about all sorts of crazy things and different like learning about networking and artificial intelligence and databases and all the stuff that we were talking about earlier, the same applies in the real world too. I mean, like mobile programming and iOS wasn't a thing really when I was in college, and just because it came out after I was in college doesn't mean that I shouldn't want to learn it or want to be curious about it. And so that the ability to sort of like learn new things and learn new domains is a muscle that starts in college, but must continue after that as well.
Sorry. Um, what, so let's say in somebody's case where they want to pursue that, where they're going to do different things. Do you start out, let's say, with Python, do coding in Python, like it, but then turn to your boss and say, hey, I really now want to do such and such and move laterally within the company, or maybe try to get an external job just to kind of keep learning and growing and adding different skill sets to your skill stack?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of benefits to staying in one's job. You have connections that you've built, you have familiarity, you have domain expertise, you have context, and the only new thing that you have to learn is the new technology stack. If you change jobs, yes, you're learning a new technology stack. You're also learning how to work with new people. You're learning a new company. You're learning a new space, et cetera. Um, and there are reasons to leave companies, um, and there are reasons to join new companies. But I wouldn't say that you have to leave. You shouldn't have to leave your job in order to learn a new skill set. And just speaking as a hiring manager, if I have a web development team and a mobile team, and I have a top performer on the web development team, and I have an opening on the mobile team, and I have a situation over there where like they'd be willing to take somebody who's like just ramping up on the technology. That's a great fit. That means they don't have to go hire a mobile engineer. Um, and you know, that's not to say that there's not a like hard and fast rule in any of these things, but I think I wouldn't I wouldn't assume that you have to go out of your current company in order to learn new technology stacks. And a company should be incentivized to give people opportunities for internal mobility to be able to try new things and try new stuff out.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why, like, for instance, I run an executive search firm and it focused more on Wall Street. And for there, they want to see a lot of tenure at a place. They don't want to see a lot of job hopping. But I've noticed in Silicon Valley, particularly, let's say young people, you'll see them switching jobs every year, every couple of years. But their logic is, hey, I'm learning a lot, but I think I hit the wall and I want to go somewhere else. So I'm going to learn something else and then keep doing it and doing it, doing it. And then a few years later, they really have a wealth of knowledge from different companies. It's almost like you're a management consultant going into these different places. You learn what works, you learn what doesn't work. And all the time, like you pointed out before, you're networking and meeting new people. So then rather than being in the same place, seeing the same people every day, all of a sudden you've widened your network, you've learned different technologies, you learned different business models. So is that kind of the future, you think? Is that where things are going to go?
I think there are some significant downsides to job hopping every year also in that, I think in the same way that you need to, I mean, and to be clear, at some point it's time to leave every job. And that may be every year for somebody, it may be after 20 years for others. Um, and I'm not, I don't think that one should stay at a job because they feel like they should stay at a job or leave at a job because they feel like they need to leave a job. However, if somebody switches roles every year, you know, depending on the company, it may take you 2 to 3 months to get up to speed. And now you're finally like at the point where you can start to have an opinion, maybe not just about the tech stack, but maybe about the company and the company's challenges as well. And, if you leave at a year, you will have produced, you will have shipped stuff, you'll have built things, and you won't necessarily get to see the outcome of that. You won't necessarily get to see that, like whether that went well or not. You won't get to feel the consequences of something that you architected poorly, especially in that case. And I think the other part of it too is that if you switch your job every year and that's what your resume looks like, any hiring manager shouldn't assume that you would stay for more than 1 year. Any coworker that you want to network with shouldn't assume that you are going to be around. So why build a relationship with you? I think there's like I don't mean to say that people should stay at a job for the sake of staying at a job. Obviously, there's always a time to leave, but there is value in going deep on something. And especially if you can pick the right company where you can go deep for years at a time, that that there's a lot of value that can come from that.
That makes so much sense because, Rick, you've seen this too. You see on people's profiles, let's say on LinkedIn, you know, X Facebook, X Google, X this, X that. And you see, and when I first started seeing that, I was like, wait, you're bragging that you keep quitting jobs. I swear to God, I was like so confused. I'm like, wait, because again, my vantage point was different where you don't see so much turnover. I'm like, wait, why are you bragging? That's not something you want to brag about that you keep moving for the reasons you're mentioning, because it's a hiring manager can be, oh gosh, I'm going to put in all this time and effort to train, Jack, and then he's just going to leave it a year, and then I got to start all over again. Oh, what I mean? It's so much work. Who needs it?
Exactly. It's a lot. I mean,
Agreed.
it's a lot to train somebody. It's a lot to invest in people. And as a hiring manager, I want to invest in people who are going to stick around and, you know, share, like build context, have meaningful insights and share them and invest. The, the investment is mutual in engineering. And I, when somebody has, when somebody hasn't stayed at a job for more than, a couple of years at a time for a decade, it it doesn't signal to me that they're going to be invested in whatever they end up next. And to be clear, like there are a lot of reasons why people change jobs. Some people just get unlucky. Some people like are really trying to find the place where they can stay for a long time. Um, and I think you know, that's certainly true. But if it helps when that reflects on the resume too.
I think it goes back to what Matt was saying earlier about, as a hiring manager or as a leader at a company, you're looking for people that can demonstrate grit, right? And like perseverance and this like intellectual curiosity. And it's very hard for that to come across when you have like a kind of like a mercenary resume, right? Where maybe like, why are you leaving? Like, are you not sticking it out? Are you not willing to kind of explore within the company? Great, because even in tough times like now, right, where there's hiring freezes and layoffs, there's still opportunity to kind of move around, right? Especially when you're in tech, especially when you're at a startup, there's always something that needs to be done, or there's always some kind of new trend or new technology that we need someone to learn, dive deep, and really tackle, right? And just not having that extra step, like that says a lot, and it's something that could be easily fixed or remedied, right? Like it's just have your butt in the seat longer, right? Or like give it a chance, right? If it's not the right team,
Hmm.
raise your hand and try to work on another team, right? Or try to say like, hey, you know what? I'm really struggling with this language or this technology. My specialty is this, or I'm actually interested and curious in this. Um, hey, can I explore that? Or hey, can you move me through? Will you vouch for me? And I mean, it goes back to, yeah, we interviewed you, we liked you, we brought you on board, we want to work with you. Yeah, chances are they're going to say yes, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's so expensive to interview people, sell them, have them join, spend the time and energy ramping them up that like, you know, much more so than the context of a 6 hour interview loop or whatever. I know so much more about a person that I've worked with for 6 months and their strengths and kind of their opportunities for development. And if they express that they want to go learn something new, like I'm very incentivized to work with that person, especially if I know if they're good at what they're doing now.
Well, you have a lot of experience doing that. So what, you ramped up in New York to from like nothing to what, like 190 people or how?
Yeah,
Well,
so there were a handful of us that founded the New York City office. I was the site lead for the first 5 years of it, and we
and
grew
this
it
is for
from
Dropbox, right?
for Dropbox.
At
That's
that
right,
time, yeah.
and grew it from zero to about 160 people total, and about 90 in engineering.
And were you responsible part of the whole interview process, or how did that work?
So it was really interesting starting an office for a company that already existed. So it wasn't. It had a lot of the experiences, and especially now that I am in this role, I had a lot of similar experiences to leading engineering at a small company, right? In terms of like quick decision making in a local context and designing things for the local environment versus Dropbox overall. Um, in terms of like cultivating a culture, especially within engineering, but also between engineering and the other functions that were in the office. There's a lot of things that ring true, especially like relative to doing that role in a head of engineering role at a company. But we also could benefit a lot from. So there's a lot of stuff we had to figure out on our own, but there also is some infrastructure that we could benefit from the broader company at Dropbox. And so it manifested differently in New York because I think we were doing things that were a little bit different. And you know, the when you're hiring your 200th engineer at a location, you can you can absorb some cultural question marks, if that makes sense. Where it's like this person's really good at this thing, but they're like maybe not very communicative, and we might need to pair them with someone who can like really like help them communicate well and collaborate well. Um, that those sorts of things like are harder. You might want to have that be your 200th engineer. You don't want to have that be your third engineer. And what that meant is that we took the Dropbox interview process for engineers and we applied a New York spin to it. And there were certain optional sort of like collaboration, like working style interviews. We made them mandatory in New York, and we like added our own flair to it to kind of, well, flair is not the right word. We added our own like modifications to it for the environment that we were trying to create in terms of being scrappy, in terms of demonstrating high ownership. In
Now, I'm curious, like, how did that engineering culture differ from New York versus San Francisco? Is there kind of like a different engineering culture, or just like a different kind of set of experiences that you jump into in New York versus the kind of San Francisco Silicon Valley crew?
Rick, is that on our side or can you hear?
Oops, sorry. Is there an audio problem?
I heard you. Can you hear me or no?
Yeah.
I, okay. So we can't.
Live audio. I
Oh,
love
I
it.
hear you, Rick. Okay. Do you hear me, Rick?
Yes.
Okay. So Matt.
I'm back. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
there we go. All right. That's all right. We'll just edit it out. No worries.
We did
No
it.
worries.
Were you referring to Dropbox New York engineering culture or New York City engineering culture?
New York City engineering culture.
Okay.
Yeah, just because I always wonder, right? So they're on Blind, it's kind of a recurring theme where people are really attracted to San Francisco and Silicon Valley, right? Because they think
Mhm.
it is kind of the biggest density of engineering, biggest density of skills, and they feel like when you get out of the Bay Area or when you get out of Silicon Valley, you have to be necessarily more senior or more specialized or more experienced, because oftentimes these are the kind of quote unquote secondary hubs, or even I've even heard quote unquote tier two city, right? Where you're necessarily having to act more like an entrepreneur engineer.
Mm.
In some of these technologies, they don't necessarily have those skill sets. They don't have that confidence. Maybe they don't want to be a people manager. They want to be like a super individual contributor.
Mhm.
And so they shy away. And I wonder if that's if that's true, or if that's just maybe a stereotype or a myth.
Yeah, I guess so. I lived in New York for about a decade, and I throughout that time there were sort of three buckets of tech in New York. There were the New York City specific industries like finance and advertising that employed a lot of software engineers. There were startups, and not as many certainly as in San Francisco, and not as many, more shiny ones. Um, and then the third bucket was like companies based in Silicon Valley that had offices in New York. And the biggest example of those, the biggest example of that is Google, that had just like thousands of engineers and owned a city block in Chelsea. Um,
Right.
and I think when it comes to New York City tech culture, I think that there's there's an increasing volume of engineers just because engineering is New York City is just huge, and there's a lot of kind of anything that you'd want to see, any sort of like interest or background or whatever. There's like just enough people there that there's enough people to have a community around whatever you're interested in, and so there's certainly enough engineers. I think the thing that I would say that there's fewer. And again, I left a few years ago. At the time, there were fewer sort of companies than you might get to experience in San Francisco. There's just like fewer startups and fewer things going on. But there's a lot of other things going on in New York, which is very different from the Bay Area. I think that culturally, New York City has a lot of different influences and different types of people, and you run into and are challenged by different different people, and you hear different things at the restaurant. You don't hear what happened on Hacker News over dinner. You hear about something you don't care about, and that sort of like separation from work and life, and the ability to kind of like learn what else is going on in the world and then maybe apply that to engineering, I think creates a different way of working, and I think a different way of thinking that I think can help people think outside the box. In contrast to something like San Francisco, where there's a lot of tech and a lot of people are in tech, and it's you have to go out of your way to think about something else sometimes.
Can I bring up, Rick, Matt, if you know what, just one nugget, because like I never thought of it this way, just to go back before we talk about Vanta, but to go back. So the 200th, engineer, it was okay to get that the person didn't have the communication skills you would have wanted for like number one or two, but at number 200 is okay, which kind of blows my mind a little bit because sometimes it's just when it comes to your career, sometimes it's a lot of luck where you come in. So that person coming in at the tail end was fortunate in a bizarre way, because if they would have met you at the very beginning, person number 4 or 5, 6, you probably said, "Hey, Jack, thanks, no thanks," because you didn't feel I'm a good communicator. But towards the end, okay, we can figure it out. Which is, if you really think about it, that's a really wild concept for people who kind of interview and just don't get it, don't get the job. And they're like, gosh, what did I do wrong? I guess sometimes it's just not, it's holistic. You don't have that you may not have the exact thing at the right time what they need. And other times it just plays out.
Yeah, I mean, the what a company needs at any given point evolves over time, right? Like, and as a hiring manager, there's not a binary like, are you good or are you not good? It is, are you a good fit for what I am looking for today? And I may be looking for, I may have too many senior engineers and I want to hire more junior engineers. I may have too many people who are really good at distributed systems and back-end stuff and I want to hire more front-end engineers. I may have people who, I may have technical problems that require like deep focus, or I may be early on and like I need people who are generalists and who can be agile of all trades. And like the needs of the company evolve quickly over time. And a 5-person engineering team is very different. A 5-person engineering team is at a very different company than a 200-person engineering team is at. And I think that like, especially when people interview, it's like easy to get discouraged that like, I failed. I didn't get the job. But it's not that you didn't get the job. It's just that there's not a fit today for what it is, for what the company is looking for. And that fit doesn't have to be based on ability. It can just be based on sort of where, like, it's not purely based on technical ability. It's sort of like how you would fit on the team, like what the needs are, kind of what the company's needs are at a given time.
I think that context is very important. I'm curious. I want to dive into the context over at Vanta. How large is the engineering team that you lead at Vanta, and are you growing that team?
Yeah, so we're about 60 in software engineering today, and which has about doubled over the course of this year, and tripled the previous year, so 10 to 30 to 60. And yeah, we're continuing to grow.
I mean, so can you give us a little like sneak peek? Like, I'm getting a sense of your like philosophy in terms of what you're looking for, but I mean, can we get the explicit details? Like, how do you stand out as an engineer in the interview process at Vanta?
Yeah, totally. So it's helpful to understand a little bit where Vanta is today as a company. We have about 4,000 customers. We're raised our Series B, but we're a little bit further along in terms of like business metrics than a lot of Series B companies are. And we're very much in a stage where we are growing our offering that we're delivering to our customers. We haven't mastered web search and now we're just like stabilizing it and scaling it to the next billion people on the internet. Like, we're very much actively developing new products, very much iterating on what we have. We're very closely connected to our customers. We take on a lot of different types of work. Like, I think some people develop expertise in one place or another, but a lot of people end up kind of moving around in different domains, working on different types of things, working with different types of people. And the things that make a Vanta engineer really successful are a deep customer focus and just a real prioritization of what a customer's needs are and what they need, rather than sort of like building something for the sake of using some shiny new technology, or building in something because you've like pulled it off of Hacker News or whatever. Like, there are very interesting technical problems to solve, but that is a secondary concern to actually solving what our customers' needs are. So customer focus is one, and that like deep focus on customers and impact. And the other one, a couple of things I would consider are like ownership, like the ability to pick something up and see it through, and the ability to work really well, um, the ability to collaborate and communicate really well. Just there are things are moving very quickly. Always, this industry is changing very quickly. Like we joke sometimes at Vanta that every week feels like a month. It's true. There's a lot that's happening in the world, and having people who are resilient, people who have grit, people who can kind of like pick up any sort of situation and work with others to get something done, and focus on customers and deliver things with high ownership. Like those are the people. I haven't said anything about technical skills. Those are the people that are the most successful in data engineering. There's a technical baseline, of course, to be able to like be successful on day one and to like be thoughtful and design systems for the long term. But a lot of the things that we're talking about here are the intangibles.
And Matt, can you share for the audience exactly what Vanta does?
Yeah. So Vanta is an automated security and compliance platform. And what that means is that we plug into tools that represent a company's security posture. So things like plugging into your HR systems and your infrastructure systems and your employee devices, et cetera. And we pull information from that in real time to help a company understand what its security posture is and whether there are potential security threats. And then when it comes time to do a compliance audit, if that's what they want to do, we help them kind of collect that information and deliver it to an auditor. The status quo on this is that the world, it's very piecemeal and based on spreadsheets and screenshots and processes. And by lowering the barrier to entry to practicing security, more companies do it. And we're giving them that peace of mind that there aren't like glaring security issues that can potentially that present significant risk to their company.
How do you, when you, whether the clients you have or client, customers, potential customers, or just seeing in the, in the industry, how exposed to cyber attacks are these businesses of all sizes? Because like, to me, just as a novice seeing from the outside, it seems there's a lot of that going on and a lot that's underreported.
Absolutely. The analogy that I like to use is that securing a company is like securing a house. And there are certainly the sorts of attacks, the really sophisticated attacks that you hear about, where somebody climbs up a tree, like lasers a hole in the third story window, climbs in, like jumps over the laser beam and steals the jewels. And you can think of that as like really sophisticated nation state attacks, et cetera. And companies that are subject to those sorts of attacks require security teams that are very specialized in that. 90+% of data breaches are due to leaving the front door open or leaving a window unlocked, or the really, really simple things that you can do to secure your company. Things like making sure that people have two-factor authentication turned on so they don't get phished, making sure that there's no customer data in publicly visible databases, stuff like that, making sure that your tools are configured correctly such that somebody can't like exploit some known vulnerability in some like IT software that's on the internet. There's a lot of really simple things to do. And so what Vanta does is we have a series of like 300 plus checks that we run against all of your infrastructure and all of the security posture of your company based on the tools that you plug in. And we can surface a lot of those like, you know, relatively simple, relatively straightforward, but like those relatively straightforward threats that you would otherwise have to go like inspect the configuration of your tools every day to kind of point out. And the reality is that like that takes a lot of time. People don't do it. And by having an automated solution, like people will actually engage with security and actually like realize that realize when they actually have threats and act on them.
So it sounds like in part, people just get complacent. And then, like you said, you're leaving the front door open, they just walk right in.
I don't think it's well, especially at smaller companies, it's not
Yeah.
complacency. It's that the person there isn't someone responsible for security. It's like the eighth job of the head of engineering. It's been really interesting for me. When I joined Vanta, it was six in engineering, and we didn't have anybody who had like whose job it was to focus on security. It was like my eighth job, and so um, I there's a lot of things to do at a small company, from finding product market fit to hiring great talent to developing the company to talking to customers, et cetera. And security is never urgent until it is. And by the time it's urgent, it's very much too late. And so by lowering the effort that it requires for someone to think about security and care about it, um, that's the difference in many companies from actually doing anything about it or not.
Now, not your clients, but do you think, as we're taping it now, there's a lot of layoffs in the tech sector, a lot of hiring freezes. Do you think where companies are kind of tightening their belt and cutting costs, they may overlook their cybersecurity team, overlook resources like you offer to save money, and then 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, we'll see some really bad things happen, like we saw with some crypto exchanges where they just kind of pretty much walk away with all the money. Like, what the hell just happened here? Is that a distinct possibility?
Absolutely. And it's a scary one too. I mean, I think like, again, we there are a lot of benefits to investing in security for other reasons, for efficiency purposes, et cetera. And we we try to help companies in making security a value driver rather than a value protector. And um, if you're looking around at the headcount and somebody is making money and somebody's not, even if that person is protecting your company against risk and like preventing the loss of money, um, I think it's can I imagine it's tempting for some companies to look at their security team when it comes time for layoffs. I mean, I know of some companies that have done that. I think that's extremely short-sighted, personally, and the risk that that presents is far greater. The downside of that is far greater than the upside that you get by retaining a couple extra people who can generate revenue more directly.
Is it like I read again as a novice, you know, you read the headlines where it seems, China is trying to do this and hack into this, and Russia's trying to hack into that. Is that overly hyped, or is that just the reality? That's what's happening. And maybe we, the US, are doing that to other places too. Is that, does that go on?
Nation state attacks, absolutely. I think that the difference is that I think where it gets interesting is like the level of sophistication that we're talking about. There are some, there are some attacks where there's a supply chain bug introduced in this random piece of code that's covered up nicely, and like they've got the signing keys, and so they can deliver vulnerable software, or they can deliver hacked software to a wide breadth of people. Like those are really, really hard and really, really sophisticated. There are nation state attacks that are like, oops, I found credit card data in a public S3 bucket. And so I wouldn't conflate nation state attack with sophistication, but there's absolutely, I mean, there are unsophisticated people making unsophisticated attacks, and they're very like targeted nation states doing sophisticated attacks and unsophisticated attacks.
It's like this is a bad analogy. It's like football. You're the offensive line and you're protecting the quarterback. So like all it takes is one time for someone to get through, and you're a big loser for letting that person get through and tackle your quarterback. So it's like you have to win every single time.
Mm-hmm.
You can't lose once, because otherwise the results are horrible.
Exactly.
I should be your spokesman, right? That's good. We could use these as taglines.
Or if your offensive line is so good, they prefer to defend the pass.
Oh,
Uh,
right.
that was a bad
I mean,
analogy. Sorry.
I'm so curious, right? It seems like it's such high stakes, right? In are you necessarily attracting engineers or technologies that are excited about that kind of like huge impact or like outsized kind of um like scale in their work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that like, going back to it, like the customer focus, that is impact.
Mm,
And by making a company more secure, you're not, you're, yes, the company benefits from that. So do all of their customers and all of their customers and all the people that entrust them with their data. And so our mission is to secure the internet and to protect consumer data. And that really, you can really see that tangibly in the work that we do. And, I think there's not everybody is familiar with the space immediately, and you kind of need to like give people some context on it. But engineers get it, and it's especially for the engineers that want to work on high impact stuff. There's a great fit to do that for them at Vanta.
Do you believe you're attracting a different kind of engineer, like based on your experience as a hiring manager elsewhere at Vanta, in terms of having that mission, in terms of having that, I would say almost a obsession about the customer?
I think that's true. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've worked with people who are extremely talented, but didn't care at all about what they worked on. They just wanted to play with cool toys. And there are places for those engineers, and that's great, but that is not what our needs are. Certainly not at this time. And I think that excitement about customers is contagious. When we present uh, product strategy roadmaps, or when we present, here's what we're going to work on and here's why, there's so much engagement from engineering on that. When you kick off a project and a product manager and a designer say like, hey, we're going to work on this thing, engineers dive into that and they say like, okay, why? Like, let me help me understand this customer problem. Like, what about this? Here's an idea. Like, engineers are contribute outside of the narrow confines of engineering when they're motivated by impact and they're given the opportunity to do that. And I think that like our engineers have unlocked, and either directly or in giving feedback or like convincing themselves that what we were doing was the right thing for the customer, they've unlocked a ton of product impact that again, aren't the technical abilities and technical skills that you would expect from an engineer.
I mean, which goes back to earlier what we were saying. It's worthwhile to stay longer than a year so you can actually have that impact. You could see those like rewards, right? You could see that iteration in over time.
Hmm. Exactly.
No, I really get a sense of what the culture is like at Vanta. I'm quite excited by it. I think a lot of companies, they say, "Hey, we're customer obsessed," and it doesn't necessarily show, right?
Mm.
They're not really focused, or they just have this kind of PR spin to it, right? They just say it to say it, and it doesn't live out in the actual actions, right?
Hmm.
And it seems like just everything at Vanta in terms of the product or the platform, there's engineering's fingerprints and technologists' fingerprints all over it, which
Hmm.
is quite rare to see, right?
And you can see that in how quickly we release updates and how quickly we respond to customer feedback. I mean, the people who are actually using our product have the best inputs and insights of anybody. And if somebody
Right.
says, "Hey, like I like this thing, but I wish it would do this. I wish it would do this," it's like great. 2 days later, it's like, and it's in the product. What do you think? Give us some feedback. And it just blows their minds that they are that we are so focused on them as customers. And it's infectious and contagious for engineers too. When you get a little dopamine hit, when you deliver some customer value, you want to do it more and you want to do it more. And that, I think it's a very virtuous cycle. So
I love
I'm
it.
excited.
Thanks for kind of giving us a window into Vanta, Matt. Thanks for coming on the show.
Totally. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
having me. I
Matt.
really appreciate it.
Thanks.